All right, yeah, so Sanjay is asking, so can you please show an example of using a trailing stop loss setup in BlackBird? Yeah, you bet. Let's see. All right, so let me go into the strategies window and we'll add a BlackBird to the list. So there's BlackBird. Add it down there. And just remember, guys, if you're new to strategies, you all always need to hit the enabled option there to get your strategies up and running. All right, so let's click OK. There we go. All right, let's get BlackBird open here. So hitting the order settings button will open up BlackBird. All right, there we go. Okay, so first thing to do is you need to select your entry order type. So I'll just go for a market. So here you go. Now to the question, how to set up an example of a trailing stop loss here. So if you'll notice here from the quick list, there are a bunch of quick list trailing options here. So the first one is just a flat, basic 10-tick trailing stop loss here. So if we select this one and then take a look at it, this is the most basic of trailing stop losses here. So if we look at the initial placement, so where's the stop loss initially going to be placed, right, when you get into a trade? Well, you're going to take the entry price and then subtract 10 ticks, right? So for a long trade, take the entry price and subtract 10 ticks there. Let me increase that. And so this one from the quick list is just a flat 10-tick trailing, no special settings or options or anything. So if we take a look at the trailing actions, so the trailing actions tab is where you go to define the type of trailing that you want. And we can see that the mode is just set to standard trailing. So it's just a fixed trailing. So if the market goes up one tick, so if the market moves up one tick from the entry price, then your stop loss moves up one tick from the entry price, and so on and so forth, right? So that's just what the standard trailing is the standard trailing takes the offset price here, right? So this offset section, is that the offset is, it's a whole section unto itself, right? So there can be lots of ways to define an offset here. And this is just using a simple 10-tick, offset here. If you want to, you can use an indicator to calculate an offset distance, such as an ATR, right? The ATR is a typical offset. So going back to the trailing actions tab here. So the standard trailing, just takes whatever was calculated, in this offset section and just uses that as a fixed trailing offset here, right? So that's why it says fixed offset. So that's the most basic here. So let's see, let's cancel that stop loss and let's take a look at another one here. So let's take a look at the 1.5 ATR trailing. So let's take a look at the options tab first and the initial placement. All right, so again, stop losses, pretty much stop losses typically will take the entry price and then subtract some kind of offset here. So now we can see that in the offset section, an indicator, the ATR indicator, is being used. And then we have the ATR multiplier, right, or factor, right? So factor is just another, is the mathematical term for multiplier. So we've just taken the ATR value and multiplied it by a negative 1.5, and that's how we get a 1.5 ATR value. So whatever that ATR value ends up being, then, once that's calculated, that value, that's calculated and used in terms of ticks, right? So the ATR produces a value in terms of points, right? So the point value from the ATR is, let me put this back here. So the point value of the ATR, is calculated. And then that point value is then used. Actually, I'm sorry. I was assuming it was going to use standard trailing here, but actually it's using a custom trailing here, which is kind of better because that way you can learn, you can visually see and learn, a little bit about the trailing capabilities here. So we have the name ATR trailing. And if we go into the action, so the action column is what's calculating the stop loss price. And we can see here, right, that the action is going to move the stop loss. It's going to move to. And so what are we doing? We're taking the last price and then subtracting that 1.5 ATR from it. So if we open this up, now we can see it's taking the last price, right? So keep in mind that the reason why the last price is using for the trailing is because, right, the entry price never moves. So if you use the entry price, then that stop loss would never move because the entry price is never going to move unless you scale in, right? Yeah, I mean, if you scale in, then your entry price will move as you cost average into a position, right? But the way trailing stop losses work is you're always taking the last price, right? And so if you're in a long position, then you're always taking the highest last price that was printed, right? So there is a little bit of calculations going on behind the scenes. So you're always taking, right, the last price, and then you're subtracting your offset. And so we can see it's taking the ATR indicator value, right, times that 1.5%, times that 1.5 multiplier, to calculate the stop losses, new price every time the market moves higher if you're in a long position, right? So as the market moves higher, that last price moves higher. So let's see. Let's take a look at a little more complex trailing here. So we also have this 10 tick trailing with a break even +1. Right, so we can take a look at this one here. So let's take a look at the options here. So the initial placement here is, again, it's just, right, we take the entry price. And this one is, again, just a simple, 10 tick. It starts off as a 10 tick stop loss, right? So we got 10 tick offset. Then if we take a look at the trailing rules here, let's stretch this out a little bit. So we see that we have a couple of trailing rules here. And there. I know sometimes it's hard to read the text there. We're going to get that resolved at some point. So let's see here. So we have two rules, right? So we have the break even +1 at 10 ticks of profit. And then we have just the typical 10 tick trailing here, right? So the break even, right? So the way this trailing is designed is that the break even will occur first, and then the flat 10 tick trailing will begin to trail afterwards. So let's take a look at the break even trailing here. So if you notice, we have a trigger condition here. So this trigger is just simply using the delay option here, right? So you notice there's a lot of other kind of triggering options here, but for a break even, at 10 ticks of profit, well, what we're doing is we're just waiting for, the market to move 10 ticks, right, in a profitable direction. Right, so as soon as the market moves 10 ticks in a profitable direction here, right, then our trigger condition has occurred, and then after that the action can start operating, can start executing. And so the action, if we take a look at this, right, we're taking the entry price and then adding 1 tick. All right, so we're taking the entry price of the order and then adding 1 tick, right? That's what a break even is, right? So a break even is just another way of saying the entry price for that order, and then this is a break even plus 1. So you take the entry price and then you just add a positive 1 tick offset. All right. So that's how we get our break even plus 1, but after 10 ticks of profit has been achieved, right? So this trigger looks for that 10 ticks of profit to be achieved, and then the action can then move the stop loss order to that break even plus 1. So, right. And we haven't discussed the repeat yet, but a repeat is what allows a stop loss to keep running, to keep moving the stop loss, the repeat is what determines if a stop loss keeps trailing or if a stop loss will stop trailing at some point, right? And so a break even, you can only move your stop loss to break even once, right? Once your stop loss moved to break even, then that action, that event is basically done and over with. You're never going to move your stop loss to break even again, right? So the repeat is set to none, right? Because a repeat or a break even only occurs one time during the life of the trade, right? So once the repeat is done, so then we have this 10 tick trailing rule here. And so what this is doing is, if we take a look at this, we have a delay again. And so the delay is now looking for 10 ticks in profit. 12 ticks in profit. 12 ticks in profit. And if you think about the math, the reason why, you might ask yourself, well, why is it not waiting for 10 ticks in profit? Why is it waiting for 12 ticks? Well, if we take a look at the break even, what did we do? We moved it to break even plus 1, right? So that means the market needs to move to at least 11 ticks of profit for the market to be 10 ticks above a break even plus 1 price, right? And so since this is a 10 tick trailing, well, if the market had made 11 ticks of profit, well, that is a 10 tick trail right there, right? So you need the market to move at least one more additional tick before you can actually start trailing, 10 ticks behind the market. And so that then adds up to 12 ticks, right? So once you kind of walk through the logic and the math, step by tick by tick by tick, step by step, you realize that, well, you actually need the market to make 12 ticks in profit before you can start moving, before a stop loss will start moving 10 ticks or start trailing 10 ticks. Yeah. So there we go. So we have another kind of delay here. And then, so once the market has made this 12 ticks of movement or more, then the action is simply, right, we take the last market price and we just, subtract 10 ticks behind it. And then that calculates, right, the new price for that stop loss, and that's where the stop loss gets moved to. And then the repeat, right, so this 10 tick trailing, we our hope is that the market just keeps moving, and so we want this 10 tick trailing to keep trailing, as the market keeps moving higher, indefinitely, right? So we see the repeat is set to indefinitely here. So that way that this 10-tick trailing can keep trailing every tick. And we also have the repeat set. So we have this repeat every. So we have repeat every one tick of movement. So every time the market moves one tick in a profitable direction, right, then the repeat will kick in and move our stop loss to the new calculated price. Right? So just remember this price here from the last, keeps getting recalculated. So as the last price keeps moving, with the trade, then a new stop loss price keeps getting calculated there. So to kind of break all these components down, right? The name is just a place so you can kind of put your own name as to what this trailing rule is doing, right? And the trigger event is basically, some kind of it's typically some kind of delay condition. The delay is used the most here for trailing rules, but you might want to wait for other conditions, like just to kind of come up with some basic concepts, like you may want your stop loss to only trail, if the MACD is above the zero line. So you could use an indicator value here. So you could have a trigger where some indicator has to equal some kind of value. So for example, I'll just use the MACD as a simple example. You could say, only trail if the MACD has moved above zero, or only trail if the stochastics has moved above 75, right? So you could use some other kind of indicator to create conditions, conditional events, that the trailing has to wait for before the trailing will occur. All right, so there's lots of other kind of conditions you can wait for. Another popular one would be profit. A lot of people say, well, I want to wait until my trade has $100 in profit, and then start trailing that stop loss behind the market, some amount. Yeah. So probably the delay and the profit or loss are probably the two most used trigger conditions here. And then the action, so the trigger is basically setting up some kind of precondition before the trailing will occur. And then the action is what is responsible for calculating the new stop loss price, right? So every time a stop loss moves or trails, right, that price has to be calculated by the software behind the scenes. And so this action is basically setting up the formula that calculates the new stop loss price. And so typically most of the time you'll use, let's see here. Let's see, this is the break even. So, let me switch over to the 10-tick trailing. So, the 10-tick trailing, typically you'll take the last price, minus some kind of offset. That's the typical way of trailing, but you also could do something like, you could use the high or low of the bar to calculate your, stop loss price trailing. So, which using the high and low is also in the quick list here. So let's get rid of this. And if we go back into the quick list here, go back into trailing, we see here there's a previous bar, low and high as an example. So if we take a look, let's take a look at the initial placements first. So we can see the initial placement is we're taking the low of the bar and just setting the stop loss at the low of the bar, right? So if you wanted to, say, take the low of the bar and then minus a tick, then all you got to simply do is just change the offset to modify this quick list, right? So, or, 2 ticks, whatever kind of offset from the low of the bar you want to use there. So, as an example. But let's go into the trailing actions here. So I wanted to show you right, so this has a trailing that's going to trail the low of the bar, as every bar prints. So if we take a look at the action, right, we're going to move the stop loss to the low or the high of the bar, depending on if it's a long trade or a short trade. So we can see here, we're just taking the low price. We're just setting the stop loss to the low price. So, and the repeat, we can see the repeat. So the repeat here, this time it's set to once every bar. So once a bar closes, that's when this trailing rule will kick in, right? So that's when the action will calculate. The action will calculate the new bar low price, or I should say, the action will move the stop loss to the new low price once every bar, right? Once per bar when a bar closes. Yeah. So another common thing here, like a slight difference, a slight modification of using this bar high-low trailing is, every once in a while I get asked, how can you set your stop loss to the lowest bar low of, say, like the last 3 bars? So that's what this look back period does. So we could set the look back period to 3, and then the processing, we can set that to the minimum value, right? So what this does is it looks at the low price of the last 3 bars, right? So this look back period, it's going to look at the last 3 bars, and then it's going to find the minimum value, right? So that would be the lowest low of the last 3 bars. Yeah, so a quick modification of that quick list, can modify this, very easily, right? So there you go. So that's how you would find the lowest low of like the last 3 bars. And then again, if you wanted to add an offset, say you wanted to go 1 tick below that lowest low, the last 3 bars, you can just add a little offset there, right? And so if we wanted the trailing to follow the same rules here, the same concept, if we want the trailing to follow the lowest low of the last 3 bars, then we could just go into the trailing actions tab again, and then go into the action, and then go into the move to, and modify the settings here, right, to look at the last 3 lows, and there it's already set to the minimum value right there. So there we go. So that will now trail the stop loss as well, trail it by using the lowest low of the last 3 bars, like so. All right, so there you go, Sanjay. There's kind of a rundown of of the trailing actions tab there for you.